The following account was taken from real testimonies. Names and details have been altered for privacy.
I didn't expect the silence to be so loud. You imagine language barriers as confusion, hand gestures, maybe awkward laughs. But that night, in a small town deep in northern Albania, it felt different. It wasn't funny, it wasn't frustrating. It was isolating. It felt like being underwater where sound exists, but none of it belongs to you. I arrived in the town just before sunset. My bus driver said the final stop was here, meaning a single street with one bakery, a small grocery store, and a row of houses that looked almost identical. No hotel, no sign, no English. I had assumed someone would understand me. Someone always does, but not this time. I pointed to a map on my phone and said slowly, "Place to sleep, hotel, room, hostel." The shopkeeper shook his head gently. He didn't understand even a single word. Not even hotel. He called a woman from outside. She passed by with the dog on a leash. They talked in Albanian, soft, warm, rhythmic words, and then looked at me. Their faces were kind but blank. I didn't exist in their language. For the first time in months of traveling, my voice felt useless. I tried again: gestures, Google Translate, a photo of a bed. Confusion, more Albanian, smiles that apologized but couldn't help. They weren't being rude. They just couldn't unlock what I was saying. After a few minutes, I stepped outside. The sky was turning pink, a small town hidden in the mountains. A language hidden from me. That's when the loneliness began. I bought bread, cheese, tomatoes from the store, pointing one by one, trying to smile normally. No words exchanged, not a single one. As I paid, the woman behind the counter said something kindly, I think. She smiled like she was trying to comfort me. I nodded. Faleminderit, I said softly. Thank you. Her eyes lit up. It was the only word I knew in Albanian. So I said it again. Faleminderit. She laughed warmly. That laugh felt like a door opening. But I didn't know how to walk through it. Outside, I ate alone by a fountain in the middle of the village. Anyone passing by looked at me with curiosity, not suspicion, just curiosity. Maybe people like me didn't usually stop here. Maybe they never stayed the night. Maybe they always found their way out before the sun went down. As the sky darkened, a little boy approached me. Big eyes, messy hair, maybe 10 years old. He just stared for a moment, then pointed at my backpack. Tourist, he said, with a very thick accent. I nodded, surprised he knew the word. He grinned, ran away, and came back with his father. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes covered in sawdust. He wiped his hands on his pants and said something. I caught only one word. Nada. Night. I shrugged, confused. Then he pointed to himself. Then to me. Then toward the road. He gestured for me to follow him. I hesitated, just for a moment. Then something in me said, trust, and I followed. The road got quieter as we walked. Houses disappeared. The mountains turned dark behind us. And for the first time in hours, I didn't feel lost. I didn't understand anything they said, not a single word. But I suddenly understood something else. Sometimes language isn't spoken. Sometimes it's offered, like a hand, and all you have to do is follow. The little boy and his father led me toward a house at the edge of the village, a small, faded blue home with a light flickering above the doorway. Not a hotel, not a guest house, just someone's home. When we reached the gate, the father turned to me and said something that sounded like Mick. I just nodded, pretending I understood. I had been doing a lot of that lately. Inside, the place smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread. Shoes by the door, family photos on the wall. A hallway with peeling paint. It felt old, not neglected, just lived in. A home with memories I would never know. The father pointed to a chair. The mother brought soup. The boy rested his head on the table, yawning. They spoke to each other in soft tones, a language that flowed like a stream I couldn't cross. I sat there, silent, smiling when they looked my way, nodding when I felt like I should, and strangely, it was enough. That silence gave me time to think. I realized how much noise we usually carry. Filler words, small talk, explanations, apologies, conversations just to avoid silence. But here, where no one spoke my language, I felt something rare. Everything unnecessary disappeared. We just were, humans in a warm room, eating soup. and somehow that was enough to be understood. Before bed, the mother handed me a folded blanket and pointed to a small guest room. A single bed, a window cracked open, moonlight on the floor. I whispered, "Thank you," even though I knew she wouldn't understand. But she smiled, this time, without saying a word. I lay down and listened to the creak outside. The house creaked as it cooled. Someone downstairs laughed faintly. Somewhere, a door closed. I stared at the ceiling and thought, human connection doesn't always need language. Maybe it just needs presence. It was one of the safest nights I'd had in months, not because I understood them, but because they didn't need to understand me, to care that I was safe. At sunrise, the father handed me a piece of paper. On it was a bus time -9:45 and the village name written in bold letters. He was telling me how to leave, how to move forward. Then he pointed to his chest, and to mine. Then he tapped the fingers together and said a single word, "Friends." That was the only word we ever both understood. I wanted to tell them how grateful I was. I wanted to explain how much it meant. I wanted to say that they reminded me of people in my life who were once strangers too. But words weren't part of our agreement, so instead, I simply placed my hand over my heart and nodded. Their smiles told me it was enough. The boy walked with me to the bus stop. He didn't say anything, maybe because he knew words wouldn't help anyway. But he stayed, hands in his pockets, staring at the ground, kicking tiny stones toward the road. We waited in silence, not awkward silence. The kind that happens when words simply don't exist, but understanding does. When the bus finally approached, he looked at me, as if choosing which word he could say. Then held up a hand and whispered something soft. I didn't understand it, but I understood him. I boarded the bus, he waved. The driver didn't speak English either. He just pointed at the seat next to the window. I sat down, took one last look at the boy standing alone at the stop. No name, no conversation. And still, I will remember him for the rest of my life. As the bus started moving, I found the first signal in ours. Messages rolled in, notifications, emails, unfinished conversations, words, words, words. So many words, and I realized something. I had spent just one day where no one spoke my language, but I had spent years surrounded by people who did, yet still, rarely felt understood. That village didn't need to speak my language to understand what I needed. I didn't need to understand theirs to feel safe. Sometimes no words at all can tell you more than every word you know. Because connection isn't always something you speak. Sometimes it's what happens when speech isn't possible. When language fails and kindness steps in. That's what happened when no one spoke my language. I learned that being heard isn't the same as being understood. And being silent doesn't mean being alone. Sometimes the quietest places leave the loudest echoes in us. Long after I left the village, the silence stayed with me. I noticed it in places I never expected: crowded cafes, busy train stations, hostels full of travelers from 20 different countries. I listened to their conversations, their laughter, their complaints, their small stories about big things and big stories about small things. I could understand every word they said, but not all of it meant something. Sometimes we think language is a bridge, but it can also be noise. I remembered that quiet kitchen in the blue house. The steam on the window, the sound of a spoon scraping a bowl. The boy resting his head on the table, the father folding his sleeves before eating. Their silence didn't exclude me, it included me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to speak, I just listened. And strangely, I listened better than ever before. Since that day, I ask myself something whenever I meet someone new. If I couldn't speak, would they still understand me? Not through perfect words, not through shared language, but through presence. A glance, a tone, a silence, a human moment that doesn't need explaining. Some people talk for hours and leave nothing behind. Some people said nothing to me, yet left something I will carry for life. It makes me wonder how many moments we miss, simply because we expect them to come in words. In that village, I didn't speak Albanian, but I learned a language I had ignored for years. It didn't sound like nouns or verbs. It sounded like the scrape of a chair against the floor, a laugh from another room, a hand pointing the way. And maybe, at some point in our lives, we all become travelers in a place. where no one speaks our language, a hospital room, a breakup, a sudden loss, a moment that separates who we were from who we are becoming. In those moments, maybe the question isn't can anyone hear me? Maybe it's, can anyone stay with me, even in silence? Because when someone stays, even when words fail, you are never truly lost. That is what happened when no one spoke my language. I came there as a traveler. I left with a new language. One I didn't know how to speak, but somehow learned how to feel. Days passed before I really talked to anyone again. Sure, I ordered tickets, bought food, asked for directions, but I didn't speak. Not the way I used to, not with noise. Not with the need to fill the air. One night at a crowded hostel, a traveler from Canada asked me, "So, how was Albania?" I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Not because I didn't have words, but because I no longer needed many. So I simply said, "Quiet, but the kind you remember." He looked at me for a second longer than normal, and that silence between us felt like the same language I had just learned. That's when I realized, sometimes people don't actually want information. They want honesty, and honesty doesn't always need words. Before that village, I was always trying to explain myself. Where I came from, where I was headed, who I was. Now, I didn't try to prove anything. I didn't try to be understood. And somehow, for the first time, I was. Language had always been my tool to connect. But now I saw that listening, really listening, was a stronger one. I looked back at the village on the map. A small dot between mountains, no famous places, no tourist signs, no reviews, just people living their life. With no need to impress anyone. It made me think. Maybe the loudest places in the world don't even make a sound. Sometimes I try to explain this story, but it never feels the same. Because the real moment can't be translated. Not into English, not into Albanian, maybe not into any language at all. It lives somewhere between sound and silence, a place words can't quite reach. And maybe that's why it changed me, because not everything meaningful needs to be told. Some things just need to be lived. If there is a language beyond words, I learned a little bit of it there. In a place I never planned to stay, among people who never tried to impress me. In silence that said more than anything words could explain. That's what happened when no one spoke my language. And maybe one day, I'll return, not to speak, but to listen.